Welcome to the Uncomfortable is Okay podcast. Today we are joined by Richard Bowles. That's Bowles, not Bowles. And he is a multi-world record adventurer, founder of Adventure Alchemy, which is dedicated to exploring how leaders lean into the challenges of the modern world. Richard, welcome to the podcast, mate.
Thanks for having me. And so with an introduction like that, mate, I'm really looking forward to this.
Good. There'll be some bowel conversation, I'm sure, around some of the stuff that you've been up to. But I always like to kick things off just with a bit of background about you. So where are you from? Where were you born? Where did you grow up?
Yeah, well, obviously you picked up the accent there, probably, did you, Chris? So I was born in the UK, but don't hold that against me. You Kiwis and Australians. And yeah, I was brought up in a tiny little village in the centre of England, a place called Leicestershire. Lots of green fields, a lot of farms, kind of just a quiet country village, with a pub and all those things you expect when you think of, England and the countryside. And then I moved to Australia 20 years ago, though. So I've been here for most of my adult life. After doing some extensive travel around the world, did the whole backpacking thing, which is kind of the reason why I ended up in Australia, because this is one of the first places I came and backpacked around. It's pretty straightforward to do, right? So the whole working visa thing. And then, years later, I end up going back here to live, which is kind of fantastic. So yeah, in a short background, that's pretty much it. And I think if we like, I know where we're going to go with this conversation with the whole adventure thing. So on that, let's go back a step. I think that extensive travel period probably really opened up the floodgates to what I do now. I always wanted to get out of England. I always wanted to get out of the village. I just knew there was more to life, more to learn, more to experience outside of, this country village that I lived in. And very early on in the piece, I got out. I managed to travel around the world and all through Asia, doing lots of hikes and jungle treks. And then I did an 8-month stint in South America, and some did the same there. And started running some mountain trails there. And this all came to a head where now I'm sort of actively seeking out adventures around the world and sort of pushing my own boundaries and limitations, but really exploring how other people do that in the context of the adventures that I put myself into.
Mm. It's always nice when people save me questions as well, because I was going to ask you about that, just in case people think that I wasn't. Richard, there was obviously that kind of thirst to get out there and thirst to go and explore the world. And there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. But one of the ways that you've done it is to put yourself in some reasonably challenging situations while you were out there traveling around. What about taking on challenge or exploring challenge kind of called to you in those early days?
The fact that I don't like it, I still don't like it. I get drawn to the things I don't like. It sounds ludicrous, a lot of people that does, but even simple things like I love like a macchiato coffee for the pure reason that I don't like it, because it makes my face go. I like really spicy food because I don't like it. I just love being challenged by stuff. I love having to think through a feeling or a situation. And that's what I really thrive for now, is just like really like making myself so uncomfortable that I actually have to think. I have to really be in the moment rather than just not being in the moment, I guess, is the short answer to that. And I've always sort of felt compelled to do that, to go and do the things that I find extremely uncomfortable, extremely challenging, because I feel that they're probably not as challenging as they sometimes might appear to be. And I always reference back to life. I think life is probably the greatest adventure, the hardest, most darkest part of life. It's just life in general is just tough and difficult and just a struggle at the best of times. And some people might say that's a bit of a negative way to look at the world. But the fact is that I think not 90% of your life is not that exciting. It's actually hard and challenging and exhausting and arduous. So I think I go and search for things that are extremely challenging, therefore that makes life somewhat easier. And I don't like the word easier, but it just makes it a bit more lightweight, because it's such I think life's just heavy.
Mm. Yeah. I think as humans, like, we're going to have discomfort regardless of what we do, whether we go out and seek adventure or seek challenges. There's going to be discomfort in that. If you stay at home, life has a habit of punching you in the face. at some point as well. So there's going to be discomfort. I think the price of a meaningful life is being able to, or learning how to navigate that discomfort so you can go do the cool stuff that makes life exciting.
Yeah. And I think if we stand any chance of really leading ourselves and leading other people, let's say, and really navigating the very uncertain future well, I think it kind of pays to know how you're going to respond to that challenge and difficulty moving forward. I think too many people avoid that sort of things. There's such an emphasis put on positive thinking. It's all about being positive, and you got to be motivated, and you got to be inspired, and you got to be passionate, and that's super important, right? I'm not saying that's not important, but what's equally as important, like the yin and the yang, the light and the shade, and all that kind of thing, is the challenges stuff that's gonna come up. And I think when people set a goal, they avoid looking at that darker path, but it's the dark path that's going to trip you up and stop you ever reaching the goal. The happy stuff takes care of itself. It's all these challenges along the route that really are going to slow you down, make you take a completely different route, or at worst, just give up altogether. So I think it's important to really focus on the darker side rather than going, I'm just going to be great. We've got this goal. It's going to be so happy. It's like, no, it's not actually. It's going to be really kind of shit. and as soon as you accept that reality, you've already made it easier for yourself to go on that journey and hopefully overcome those obstacles and reach whatever it is you're trying to attain.
Yeah, brilliant, mate. That was one of the reasons this podcast started out. Like, I was having a look it was on LinkedIn actually, how long I've been doing it for. It's been 6 years. There was a 2-year break
Oh, wow.
in the middle of it. We're up to, I think you'll be like episode 308 or 309 or something. But I loved podcasts and I listened to a lot of podcasts then. And a lot of the podcasts back 6 years ago were about that positive thinking and setting goals and getting after them and hoorah. But none of them were talking about the really hard path that you have to go through, and the barriers that you come up against and the mistakes that you make and the challenges that you need to overcome to get to that hoorah, to get to the goal. Or if they were, they'd kind of brush them off. They wouldn't talk about them practically. They wouldn't really acknowledge them that, hey, these things suck. Like,
Yeah, well, I
not
don't know
that much
why
fun.
actually. Yeah, and I tell you the reason why people do that, which I believe this is why I do what I do now in terms of the business that I run, is that I want to find out how to overcome change, uncertainty, doubt, anxiety, all the dark stuff in real time. The problem is when someone goes and achieves something, starts a business, does amazingly well, is a sports person at the highest level, when they talk about what they've done, they're a different person because they've done what they've done. Meaning that if you're approaching a goal, you approach it very different. You think about it very differently before the goal than you do after you've achieved the goal because you've transformed.
Yeah.
So when you look back, you miss all the bit that was what actually really happened. It's very hard to know what actually really happened. So now I'm going out and trying to figure out in real time what's happening. What is my response to change, uncertainty, a crisis, all those things in real time? Or the people I'm spending time with in some of these adventures, observing them and find out what are they actually doing in real time to move through an uncomfortable situation. And I just think that's the failure of a lot of people. I mean, I hate to use a Steve Jobs as an example, but I remember listening to him once and he said something about, it's not about the money. I thought that's a really, really interesting thing to state, because I'm pretty sure in the early days when you're in that garage of your parents, working, you were thinking about the dollars for sure. But now you've got a lot of wealth. It's very easy to say it's not about the money. It's just about the work. So, and I think you just miss, because you transform into this completely different person. It's very easy to gloss over and not understand really what happened in those events leading up to overcoming that challenge.
That's a great way to articulate it actually. And it's a thought that's been kind of rolling around in the back of my head, I guess, but you've actually put it into words as to, hey, this is why it is hard.
I did my best.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
nice. It was nice. And your example of Steve Jobs, and I'm not comparing myself to Steve Jobs, but I'm at the process of starting off my own business as well. And this morning I sat down and I did a little bit of strategy work on it and thinking about, okay, why do I want to do this? And it isn't about the money, but at the moment it's also about the money because I have two little kids. I have a mortgage that I need to pay. So I do need to make money from this. I don't need it to turn into Apple and make that much money, but I've got stuff that I need to spend money on. So that is a necessity.
Yeah. And I think we often just, I mean, all the different leaders I work with, I mean, passion gets thrown around a lot in this development space. And again, it's super important. I'm not saying it's not important, but the way I feel about passion sometimes is it's good when you've got it, right? But what happens when you don't have it, which is most of the time, particularly like you're starting your own business. That's exciting, but when you go on the journey, it becomes really arduous and challenging and frustrating, and it ends up being really awful. But then some people will say, yeah, but then you have this passion that sustains the hard bits. Like, but you don't. When you're doing the hard bit, you don't have passion. You don't have inspiration or motivation or any of those, positive feelings that you need. Really, I guess that always comes down to just a discipline, right? You just got to discipline yourself to do stuff when you don't want to do it, or you've got to figure out a way to overcome all those obstacles and all those dark and nasty things that are inevitable on any journey. And that's why I shy away from the positive emotions, because they only work when they're there, not when they're not there. You know what I mean? There's no point when things are getting hard going, well, I really want to get ahead and progress, but I just don't have the motivation today. I mean, that's the issue right there. It's like, it's not about having motivation. It's just about pushing through whatever this is, regardless if you've got motivation or you're inspired or you're passionate or anything else. And again, it just to come full circle here, it's about really looking about all the negativity and the darkness on any one journey. I think if you understand that that's going to be the reality of any goal attainment, and you look at that and go, okay, well, if I'm going to go from A to B, these are the things that are likely going to happen. I think you can almost prepare in advance for those things. And that gives you a better opportunity to move through those things and have clarity in the chaos and have some control of your emotions. I mean, it doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but it makes it a lot easier if you acknowledge that those things are going to be along the way, and you somewhat think about how you might respond to the fact that you can't be bothered today. I'm hoping that makes sense.
It does. It does. It reminds me, I think it was a Stephen Pressfield quote. He said, the author of The War of Art, he said, if you need to feel your best to do your best work, you're not a professional. You're just a fortunate amateur.
Guess so. Yeah.
One thing that I was fascinated by, Richard, is you like doing things that you don't like.
Yeah.
You like doing things that are hard. And obviously that's training you to get better at the dark, to get better at the challenge, to kind of build your capacity to cope with adversity. Are there things also that you get out of doing something hard in the moment as well? Because that's a really long game kind of vision as you take on challenging things. Like, is there some short-term benefit that you get as well?
Yeah, constantly. Well, there's that instant gratification. It's just that, like this, and then, it's actually like, it's probably the best feeling you're ever going to get when that moment just after you did something that was extremely, extremely hard. Further down the track, it's not so exciting, but straight away, you just overcame it. Like, like I speak for a living, right? I'm on a stage 2 or 3 times every single week, right? No matter how many times I speak in front of an audience, I feel terrified of every single time, right? And then when it comes to the end of that presentation and it actually leave the stage, then it's like, oh my God, that's the bit that's amazing. It's like, oh, it's like this weight's off you. You feel fantastic. You overcame something that was, a challenge and a fearful event. And that makes you feel elevated to, I think, more than anything else. I honestly believe that when I've overcome some like ridiculous challenges in some of these adventures, like being in the middle of a war zone and sort of still carrying on through a desert while missiles flying over your head. I mean, that is a moment where you're terrified, right? And it'd be easy to say, actually, let's not carry on moving forward here. Let's just retire and find some safety. But still moving through that, when you move through that war zone and it's all finished, it's kind of like, oh, that right there, that's an amazing feeling. And I don't feel you get that anywhere else apart from when you do the hard stuff.
Mm. Do you get a similar feeling after a spicy curry?
No.
No, just tears.
No, just tears. No.
But we've been talking for about 20 minutes already, and we haven't really touched on the adventures that you have been on. So you were backpacking, you were going out and exploring the world. When did you decide, hey, I'm going to make a business out of this? I'm going to go and start doing some hard things, start telling stories about it, start teaching people the skill sets that I'm learning as I go and do this.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I come from a corporate sales background. When it came to strategy, that's the industry I put myself into. And I worked through that, reasonably successful, became a sales manager. Then I was in sort of sales leadership for a small amount of time. And I just felt like I wanted something more. I just thought this corporate life's not really for me, even though I was fairly good at, and it was paying the bills well and all those things. And at that time, I was just running to keep fit, actually. And each morning I'd go out and sort of do 5, 10Ks, and then I'd sort of trained up to do my first marathon. And then one day I was just out running in the morning before work, and I thought to myself, what would happen if I just didn't stop right now? Like, where would I end up by lunchtime? Where would I end up by tonight? And how would it feel? Like, that'd be horrendous, like just to keep running for the whole day. But it's kind of appealed to me. And that idea just sort of started to flower and sort of bloom a little bit, to the point where I just arranged to go and find the longest march trail in the world, which happens to be here in Australia, at 5,500 kilometers running the Great Divided Range. And I just thought to myself, I'm going to go and do that. I was going to run end to end of that. Didn't think too much about it. I didn't know if I could do it. I didn't know if I'd lost a day, half a day. And what I ended up doing was I ran a marathon a day for about five months, carrying pretty much all my belongings on my back, out in the wilderness, not seeing people for days. And thankfully got to the other side of that and achieved it. I mean, literally just like that. You see, but that again goes back to why I said, like, people go, well, it surely wasn't that easy. No, it probably wasn't. But at that time, I wasn't researching the idea of how you overcome running a 5,500 kilometer trail, right? So when I look back at it now, I don't really remember stuff because I was just doing it. As now, you see, I actively look for the lessons in the lead up to doing something. Like, I choose a particular adventure and I know I'm focusing on all the pre-elements that are happening, my thought processes, what exactly my decisions I'm making, what decisions other people are making. So, for that adventure there, yeah, it was pretty much, I just decided to go and do it. But there probably was a way more to it than that. It's just that I don't really remember all those things. Not to the point where I can be honest about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for not lying to us. So that was the one that got the ball rolling. When you are choosing adventures now, when you're choosing to do hard things, do you have a process that you go through to pick opportunities?
Well, now it's all based around my work, right? So, because I work with corporate organizations, it sometimes comes down to what my clients want. So, for an example of that is, one of my clients came to me and said, we want our people to know more about compassion and empathy. And so I'm looking at my toolkit of adventures and thinking, I actually don't know if I have much in the way of anything deep on empathy and compassion. So I came up with the idea that, probably where I'd find that would be in the funeral industry. I think like a funeral director surely has a huge amount of compassion. Well, perhaps, who knows?
You would hope.
You hope so. Compassion and empathy, and they'd have to obviously deal with the dead, but also deal with the families and then their colleagues, and it must be kind of a struggle. So I got back to my client and I said, how about if I go and do that as an adventure? I go and work in that industry and I spend time in it, and I work every facet of it and look for where there's compassion and there's empathy from the people that do it, from the funeral directors themselves, the people that work in the morgue, the people that work in the hospital morgues, the people that work with the palliative care people, the grave diggers, all those kind of people. And also how I perhaps experienced that doing those kind of roles. So that's how I actually chose that particular adventure. So that's generally how it works these days, is I go, oh, you want a solution to this? Let me go and experience that, or find people that actively do that. And then I come back with some strategies and some ideas of how your people can gain that, how that sustain that. But more importantly, it comes to something that's pretty entertaining and fun at the same time, rather than me just get the whiteboard out and teach you about compassion.
Yeah. 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 Must have been an interesting adventure to go through.
Yeah, it certainly was. It was because I was personally terrified of it. I don't do death very well at all. In fact, one of the biggest struggles I had in that particular project was the fact that when I was going to go and see my first dead body in the morgue, I felt extremely guilty because I never went to see my own mum when she died. I had no interest. I was like, oh, I don't want to see even my mum. Creepy. It's my own mother, right? So then I had kind of a challenge to get over there, because I felt extremely guilty that, like, wow, I'm never going to see a dead body for the first time. It's going to be a complete stranger. But yet now they're not a stranger, because they're permanently etched in my mind forever, which by itself is a fascinating sort of finding, is that, I never knew this person. And well, I never knew when they were alive, but I knew when they were dead. And somehow now I have this connection with a dead person. It was a person, of course, and I can see them very clearly now. And what was interesting about that was that the first time I saw that person in the morgue, and then when I put my hands on that person for the first time to move them into a coffin, they'd already been dressed and they looked nice. Apart from me remembering they were so cold, I felt an instant connection and almost a responsibility to make sure that person was laid to rest. Yeah, I had nothing to do with them ever before. So it was interesting as the week went on to understand that's kind of how funeral directors feel. I feel like I'm responsible for making sure this person, looks nice, goes through all the process seamlessly, that their loved ones can, see them again and go, oh, wow, they look amazing, they look beautiful, and then lay them to rest. Kind of an interesting thing to have a connection with someone that you can't speak to or never seen before.
Yeah. Yeah. That. I have no idea why that would be, but that is really fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny, it wasn't, I remember that first encounter was, they say you never forget your first, right? And the guy I was with in the morgue that day, I think he strategically did this as well. When I look back at, we filmed the doco too, actually. So I was just looking back through the footage. The gentleman came out with a white sheet on him, and he was dressed, as I said, but he had this white sheet on him. And he was telling me as he rolled back the sheet slowly. I'm tipping when he's there by himself, he just pulls up the sheet, bonks him in the coffin, right? But it was rolling it back slowly, and I just saw a hand, and then, there was a foot, and rolled up. And he said to me, what you have to remember is, as he's reeling this sheet back, is that this is somebody's dad, this is somebody's brother, this is somebody's husband, he's a grandfather, he was a business owner, and he revealed this person. And I was like, oh, that felt better that you told me that, because I was kind of scared of a dead person. And but that idea and that what he told me there really hit home when I went to the guy's funeral the next day, when I did see his wife and his grandchildren and his sons and the people in the community, all that. The funeral was like, oh wow, yeah, okay, I understand the words, but now to see that, like, that's pretty powerful. And to be scared of somebody was, I felt guilty again. Like just yesterday, I was terrified of this guy coming out of the fridge. And today it's like, no, I've got a connection with this guy, and wow, I feel privileged that I'm here to witness this and all the nice things that people are going to say about him today.
Yeah, that's cool. And that's a really, I think, valuable way to think about it as well. And not just for people who have passed on, but for people out there that you don't know as well. That so the guy that cuts you off in traffic, or the person that drops his shopping bag in front of you, is that it's not just an inconvenience for you. It's a person, and they have all of the stuff going on in their lives. And you're right, you never forget your first. I remember the first dead body that I saw. I worked in healthcare. I was a physio in the hospital, and I walked into a room to see a patient, and I was like, oh, this is not what I expected. And I slowly backed out, and I went to see the nurse, and I was like, hey, Mr. Jones in room such and such. And she turned around and she was like, oh yeah, he's dead. And I was like, okay. That was, and I thought that, but it was quite an offhand way to have that first experience. I would have much preferred, I think, your one.
Well, look, that project was interesting because I almost did everything backwards to some degree, meaning that the first day, like, I attended funerals and carried coffins, but didn't see a body. And then as the days went on, I then saw a body that was prepared and dressed and, balmed and looked pretty and stuff. And then after that, I then had to go and like pick up bodies from the hospital who had just died. And that was like, wow, they look very different when they're dead like that. And then it kind of finished off with the embalming process and seeing that that's pretty evasive and pretty full on. I kind of did it all backwards.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, normally you'd pick up the body first. And so I'm thankful it worked out that way, because it was just like an easier introduction into those, very confronting kind of situations.
Yeah, it sounds like the guy that you were working with was reasonably gentle in how he exposed you to it, which is great. I'm really interested in hearing about what you look for in yourself as you're going through these experiences. Now that you've learned to pay attention to them, and you're looking to pull learnings out from going on these adventures, whether it's at the funeral home, whether it's in war zones, whether it's with crocodiles.
Yeah.
What are you watching for in yourself to learn from as you go through this?
Well, I generally I don't think too much about the moment, because I do all the work in advance. What I mean by that is, if we go back when we started this whole conversation, I said, that I embrace the dark side. That's not the Star Wars thing, but I know, for example, going into, say, this death project, I know, first of all, I'm scared. I know I'm scared before I get there. So I go, well, I'm going to be like seeing dead bodies. So how do I feel about that? And okay, so I feel I'm going to be anxious. Okay, well, if I'm going to be anxious, what am I going to do about my anxiety in the moment? Rather than wait for the moment to happen and feel anxious, where I might go, actually, I don't want to go inside the more things. I'd rather deal with it up front and go, okay, well, if I'm going to be anxious, maybe I'll come up with a strategy or an idea that can help me control my anxiety in the moment, which will then give me some clarity. And with the clarity, it will give me some sort of control. And with that control, I have some confidence. And then I'll be experiencing it, taking the actions that are necessary, rather than just getting caught up in the emotion. So I do that for every project. I think it through, and there's pretty obvious things. Like, I know, like, tomorrow I've got a speech to give, and I just know, well, I know what's going to happen. I'll be fine until I get there, and then be like, oh, that's right. Don't forget your lines. No. So it's like, I'm already thinking, okay, well, I've got to remember that when those feelings come up, to breathe, and remember that I've done this a billion times before, and I've got some great content to share, and I'm going to help people, and keep breathing and stay grounded, and all those things, rather than getting there and letting that take control of me, which is always ended a huge mess. And I do that with everything that I put myself into. And sometimes the question comes back that, well, how do you prepare for something that is unexpected? So an example of that is that I once, in the middle of the Outback, he called himself a farmer, so let's call him an angry farmer, because he put a shotgun in my mouth and told me he was going to blow my effing brains out. Now, I can't prepare for a moment like that. And I never thought, when I was going to go off into the Outback, that a guy might want to blow my brains out. But that was actually a somewhat try not to sound too arrogant here, comfortable situation, which shouldn't be comfortable. And the reason for that is because I put so many of these little strategies and ideas in place to overcome fears and anxieties and uncomfortable stuff that almost by default, that stuff kicks in. When I should be scared, I've got a strategy for that. When I should be extremely anxious, I've got a strategy for that. When I feel uncertainty, I've got a strategy for that. Like all those things that happen to me in the moment, I'm actually got strategies and ideas that I'm using to keep myself calm and in control of a somewhat crazy situation. And I feel like if you can do that on your day-to-day stuff, like meaning that if you just look at your average day, you can probably you can work out what sort of confrontation you're going to have throughout the day with yourself or with other people. Like, oh, I'm going to see that client today, and I know they're really kind of hard on me, and it always makes you feel a bit anxious or whatever. Like, so if you know that's coming, then why don't you prepare for that? And I think if you do that throughout each day and the weeks and the months, what happens is all those little small challenges that you overcome over time, build up, that prepare you for those things that you could never predict. Like a guy pointing a shotgun in your mouth.
Yeah. I'm interested in what was the strategy that you used at that moment?
What you mean apart from shitting myself?
Yeah, that could have scared him off.
Well, it was a funny one. So when I do these adventures, obviously, as you know, I'm in the moment. I'm studying and observing and trying to work out, decisions and ideas and things that are happening. And then after I've done that adventure, I sit down with a team of psychological experts, essentially, and we delve into all those stories and ideas, and they delve into my psyche and my character. In fact, it's a far more confronting time than any adventure that I've ever been in, because it really is not that nice to sometimes go to places you don't want to go. And I've been seeing that this particular, I've got a few people I sit down with, but this particular lady I've been speaking a lot to, and we'd come up with all sorts of ideas of how to overcome all sorts of things. And then one day I just said, oh, that reminds me of that time that guy stuck a shotgun in my mouth and then just carried on talking. She was like, hey, just back it up a bit, Rich. Like, what? She goes, that's something you should tell your therapist. Like, that's what I'm talking about. But I glazed straight over it. Like it was just inconvenience rather than something that was obviously pretty life-threatening. And again, when we unpacked that story, she was like, yeah, like the reason why that was somewhat easy to overcome is because you did have all those little strategies that you built up over the months before, because this was on this big long run I was telling you about. So the months before that, I'd been overcoming all sorts of little things. My day-to-day stuff, like I can't be bothered today and I don't want to get up, and there's wild dogs I've got full of by for a week, and across the Daintree River on foot, and all these crazy things. And they just stacked up over time. So I was just ready. And basically all it came down to is that like I was able to elevate myself above that situation, like a helicopter almost, and look at it from a brand new perspective and have control over it. I remember joking with the guy to start with. Like I was like, oh, I'm doing this run across the Great White Range. He's like, who are you? And his gun, it ends up in my mouth. I'm like, well, I'm Richard, and I'm really just trying to speak with the master of the door shotgun. And he was like, oh, who are you? Why are you here? And I was just joking. I said, oh, I'm doing it for charity. Do you want to donate? And just, just all these crazy things. So first of all, I make light of stuff that I'm scared of. That's a good example there. So if I'm really scared, I go, well, let's make it fun rather than scary. So I'm making it fun. And then I'm thinking to myself, well, so I'm trying to make it fun, but he's not giving me anything here because he isn't fun. He's not a fun guy. Clearly. But the good thing about looking for something from above like that, like a bird's eye view, is that you have that different perspective. So then I was kind of like, well, I just need to look for a solution here. I don't need to be scared. I don't need to be all anxious about this. I just need to look for a solution. And and I guess if you don't have that control over your emotions in a situation like that, it'd be quite easy to either fight back, which would probably be not a good idea, or run away and retreat, which also might not be a good idea, rather than just try to sit where that uncomfortableness and sort of joke your way through it and just try and look for solutions in the moment. And to the point where my solution was then to look behind this sort of little lean-to shack that he had and saw that there was these orange trees. And I said, "Oh, I like your orchard. You've grown some trees there." And he pulled that shotgun out of my mouth and he goes, "Yeah, actually, I've been growing those mandarins for a while. Would you like to try one?" Sure, sure. So he goes over and pulls these mandarins off the tree, and he comes back and he's like, "Yeah, the sun's blessed them this year. They're the best color. They're really sweet." And he's just talking to me like it's normal. And he goes, "Anyway, my old mate." "Old mate? Oh, you know, blew my bloody brains out 2 minutes ago." And he told me which way to go. And, you know, you need to go past my little lean-to here and go down that fence line and you'll be on the right track where you're sort of heading. It's like, wow, I can't believe it. But then he just finished it off with, as I went down that fence line and jumped over the fence, he goes, "Anyway." I was like, "Oh no." He goes, "It's not me you need to be scared of. It's my neighbor." Oh shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, look, just prepping in advance, a huge one for really prepping for stuff in advance. Because I believe, look, you're never going to go externally where you're not willing to go internal. You know what I mean? Like you've got to go you're never going to make it. You're never going to grow out there if you're not growing inside here. Do you know what I mean? Like if there's fear out there, you need courage in here. Do you know what I mean? If there's chaos out there, you need clarity in here, right? Like it's just the way it has to work. Like you're just trying to combat the world like that. So it's all about just going internal. Like I think ourselves is the biggest challenge. I think we are ground zero for leadership for that reason. It has to start with us, right? Everything has to start with us.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree.
Yeah.
Do you have a process that you work through to prepare yourself, Richard, for when you are going into a challenge?
Well, like I said, I just think through things deeply before I go into them. Yeah. Like my day to day, like what's the obvious things to start with? What are the obvious, barriers that are going to come up? I'm not talking about, like the real external barriers. I'm talking about those internal barriers. Like, what am I going to put in the way of this being a success? Because that's really what's going to happen. Like that's the only thing that is going to be the problem. Like I was in New Zealand, that's your neck of the woods. I did the Tiarua Trail, if you know that one there, from the top of the north down to the bottom of South Island. First person to crack that one, which is great. But remember, there was a section probably, maybe I'm going to say north of the South Island, not Charlotte Pass, something way more complex than that. Can't remember. But I remember, what I do remember is that I was going to be in that mountain range for 4 days, even knocking off 50 Ks a day. I was still going to be there for 4 days. And I was met by the Department of Conservation dog. And they came to meet me because they knew I was doing this long trail. And they said, "Richard, we come to see you because we want to make sure you're prepared to go in this mountain range." I said, "Well, I am. Of course I am. Like, I'm an adventure guy. I've got all the equipment. I've got all the stuff. I've got the beacon. I've got the emergency equipment, all that kind of stuff." They went, "Well, the reason we say that is because this is a very arduous range and it takes the most experienced mountaineer's life. And just last week, we found 2 adventure guides perished in these mountains. So we just want to make sure you're on your A game." I was like, "Okay." So I made sure I had all the right equipment. I made sure, I communication the best I could, flares, extra clothing, extra food, you name it, overboard. And I headed off into these mountains. And the first night was horrendous. I remember setting up camp, that's fine, had dinner, went to sleep. And the next morning it was torrential rain. I couldn't see that far in front of me. I was literally a foot in front of me due to the fog. There was lightning strikes. The wind was howling. It was horrific. And I plodded along this ridge line for the day, actually soaked to the bone. All my equipment was soaked. Any kind of flares were just got, like, it was so bad. And then I had another night then in the cold and wet. Next day then was going to be the highest part of this pass, of this mountain. And I remember sort of climbed up this mountainside, and again, storms, heavy rain, lightning strikes that I can't even see because the fog's so thick. And as I'm trundling up this sort of mountainside, I think to myself, I'm way out my depth here. I'm not an adventurer. This is not what I do. I'm not a mountaineer, that's for sure. And I'm really scared right now. I'm terrified. I shouldn't be here. I don't want to be here. And as soon as those kind of thoughts were running through my mind, what I found was I was tumbling and out of control until I just finally came to a stop like that. And I just remember lying down on my back, looking up into this sort of thick fog or abyss, if you like, not feeling cold anymore, not even feeling wet, not feeling scared, not feeling anxious, not having no doubt, like nothing, to the point where I thought that, you know, there's going to be a big hand that came out of those big clouds and went, welcome, you know, going to heaven or whatever. And then after a while, I sort of wiggled my fingers and toes and sort of got myself up. And as I went to get myself up, what happened was that I couldn't, because my backpack had wedged between these two rocks. So I'm trying to pull myself free. And as I'm doing that, what I realized was that my legs were swinging from underneath me. And I was actually out on the edge of the cliff face to be saved by these two little rocks. Yeah, tell me about it, right? So obviously I was really slow and delicate and got myself free. And I hiked back up to the top of the peak and over the other side. And when I eventually got out of that mountain range, I looked back through my GPS data, and I'd actually tumbled 80 meters down this mountainside, which is a long way to tumble, to nearly fall to my death and be saved by two rocks. And the question I asked myself after that was like, what actually happened? Sure, it was raining. Sure, there was lightning strikes. Sure, you can only see a foot in front of you, which is pretty important when you're running across the top of a mountain. It's nice to be able to see your feet, right? Sure, like but was it those things? Was it the weather? No, I don't think so. I always say to people, I think it was like me, myself, and I, right? Because that's always just enough to make things really, really complicated. Like I had all the equipment with me. I had to know how to do it. What made me trip over was me having self-doubt, fears, anxiety, and all those things, and not focusing at the job at hand. So it was me. I'm the one who bubbles that up, not the environment. So now it's about, how do I respond to the environment, be it in a business context or literally in the mountains, and prepared to how to respond when those things come up, because they always come up. Any adventure, there's always fears, there's always doubts, there's always uncertainties, there's always anxiety, frustrations, anger, the list goes on, right? So I'm always going into any new adventure thinking about those things. And what am I going to do if they come up? And look, some of those ideas and strategies are the same every single time, but I'm still thinking my way through them. And I think if you just acknowledge the idea there's going to be those challenges, you already have a better chance of overcoming them when they do arise, even if you didn't put a strategy in place, just because you thought about the idea and they weren't sprung on you. You're like, I knew this was coming.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing there as well is it's not about trying to not have those emotions, to not have that fear and not have that anxiety, but it's about knowing how to respond when that does happen. And so you can put it through an effective response, even when you're scared and anxious and worried and a little bit overwhelmed.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. Yeah. It's just, look, it's only like in all the adventures that I've done and personally experienced other people, you know, lived on the streets of India, for example, and you're watching those people that live on the streets, or with all the leaders that I work with around the globe, like it doesn't matter in what sort of context, like there's only ever really three responses to sort of change and uncertainty and this whole uncomfortable piece, right? And that basically is, well, the first one's the easiest, is just curl up into the fetal position and just go, oh my God, hoping it's all just going to go away, which is just being inactive, right? The second level up above that generally is people being reactive to stuff, which is where kind of, I guess, most people kind of fit, you know, things happen, I need to react to it. A more desirable and the third and final one would be to be proactive, right? Trying to get ahead of the change and uncertainty and all those things that are going to happen. But even being proactive, I mean, really, that just comes down to being agile, I guess. But even the most fastest reaction time and the most agile person is not ever can't keep up with the demands of the evolving, you know, as business evolves. It's just too fast. And so I believe that rather than being those three things, what we need to be is adaptive. So the fourth one, which is a surprise one. So you've got inactive at the bottom, don't do anything at all. Failure. Reactive, responding. You can't you're just fixing today's problems, not tomorrow's problems. You got being proactive, which is desirable. And most of the organizations I work with sit between reactive and proactive. which is fine. But where they need to be is be adaptive, or more to the point, be instantly adaptive, meaning that when things happen, well, I've just changed and molded and I'm ready to go. I don't have to think about it. And for that to happen, we have to look at what challenges are you personally going to face between A and B, and think of ways to make that a lot easier. As you said before, they're always going to be there, but rather than let them consume you, you need to control them and have some clarity in those moments so that you can progress, or more importantly, progress quickly.
Yeah. So if you're sitting down doing your SWOT analysis, the bulk of the threat box should be yourself.
Yeah, totally. Well, that's the only threat you've got. It really is. Like, it's, like it, and I think intuitively we know that, right? We know, like, we just, for some reason we have to avoid all that stuff, and we focus again on that positive side of things, which I believe this takes care of itself. Like, because it's good until it's not, and then you have to figure out what you can do with the opposite part of that, right? It's just balancing that yin and the yang. It's not about ignoring the positive side of things. It's just not. You just need to make sure that both sides are equal. That the light and the dark are both equal, and then you're a balanced individual, right? It's how one leg firmly in the light and one leg firmly in the dark, and a struggle about the line, and that's a really good balance to have. But what we tend to find is that most people have both legs in the positive side or the light side, and that's when you come off balanced and you get caught out. And ultimately, again, you slow down on the journey, or you have to take a new tack, which could be longer or more complex and more arduous, or again, at worst, you just give up altogether, and we don't want that.
Yeah. Yeah. This has been a great Jedi conversation so far. I've got a couple of questions that I'd love to finish off with, mate. And we've talked about a lot of this stuff already, but I'm interested to hear if you have any other thoughts on it. But are there any other ways that you build your capacity to cope with hard things than what we've talked about already?
But doing hard things, right? Just doing hard things, it's a very stoic way of looking at it too, right? Like doing the hard things, it comes down to being resilient, but then you got to ask yourself, what's resilience? Because people often talk about resilience being the capacity to bounce back.
Yeah, I hate that.
It's totally right. Because, some people take years to bounce back.
Mm. Some things aren't a nice defined acute event. Sometimes the stress and the pain and the challenge just continues on for months and years. So it's totally. Do you wait until that's over before you bounce back?
No, but you just need to work through it, right? And the only way you're going to work through it is to be able to control. I just think I think you need to, it's not managing the uncomfortableness. Sorry, it is managing the comfort. It's not trying to manage the things that happen, like the change and the uncertainty and the fears and that kind of stuff. That stuff becomes a lot easier when you can manage yourself. So it's just about managing yourself. You can manage yourself. You can get through anything. That's all resilience is managing yourself through a somewhat difficult event.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not bouncing back. It's far from it. You don't bounce back.
No, one of the ways that I describe it is being able to navigate those times and find your way through them rather than wait for them to finish and then bounce back. Richard, how do you look after your health? Like, how do you set yourself up in a way that you have the capacity to deploy all these skills that you have?
Well, this is not a good time to talk about my health, because
we can talk about that offline afterwards if you'd like.
I put a few kilos on as of late, mate. I like to blame COVID. Not really COVID's fault, of course, but I've actually been injured for a long time, which means I don't get out and do I'm a KIM runner, and I don't get to do the kilometers or the mileage I used to at all. And I've somewhat used that as an excuse to take my foot off the accelerator a little bit in that department, which is been a really interesting exercise, because you realize how detrimental that is to every other aspect of life, right? Not having that fitness component to some degree. I mean, saying that, we've got a dog. I take her out for huge long walks and hikes and stuff. It's not like I've not been doing anything at all, but I think we definitely need to push ourselves physically into that uncomfortable space too, right? To the point where, like, this is not necessarily fun. and just push yourself there. And I think that just wonders for not just obviously the physical aspect, but definitely your mental capacity too. So it's just been an interesting exercise to not keep pursuing that and realize how it has kind of ruined a few things. Not quite, but, and then obviously I'm always working on my own mental health. I'm a huge advocate for mental health. Just work. I mean, obviously, apart from the things we've spoken about today, I like to write a diary each day. I always commit to writing a page in that diary, and I don't think about what I'm going to write. Sometimes I just write a bunch of words that don't actually mean anything at all. They're not even a sentence. And those days where I don't know what to write, that's what I write. I do not know what to write. And I think those kind of things just keep me on track, get stuff out of my head, just freeing up my mind. I think we need to free up the ability to think rather than think too much on the difficulties and the hardship and, you know, the challenges that are ahead sometimes. You need to have the ability to think. So I wanted to free up my mind. I'm very keen on that kind of stuff. Apart from, I mean, spiritually, I'm a spiritual person. I'm not a religious person at all. Again, going back to that little project, the death project there, if you want to call it that, death and taxes. You know, I did question that whole piece again. Like, you know, is there another, you know, do we go somewhere after this? Don't we go somewhere after this? And what I learned from that actually is that what I do know is that all those people that we leave behind have some wonderful things to say about us. Like the really nice things. Not once have I been to one of those funerals and someone went, actually, it was a bit of a dig. No one ever said that. They might have been thinking it, but they never said it. Yeah, so there's kind of three aspects. Obviously, you can go into all the different quadrants. Can't be like, you know, finance and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, I do work hard on my mental health. And I think that's probably I think somewhat that's more important than the exercise first piece, because if I can get my head straight, I can get to exercise. And then when I exercise, that then adds and complements my mental state. So they kind of work in unison, those two, I believe.
Yeah, I think like, at least for me, that they kind of bounce off each other as well. As that if I'm struggling with one, if I then go and do the other, that usually feeds back into lead to a more positive outcome. Like if I'm struggling with my mental health and I can't seem to shift it, getting out and moving some heavy things around or going for a run is really valuable there. Or if I'm struggling with the physical side of things, working on some mental health actually then really impacts how I perform physically as well. So I think, yeah, as you say, that they're intricately intertwined. Richard?
Yeah, totally. It's sort of proactive.
Yeah. If people are interested in finding out more about you, mate, if they've enjoyed our conversation, want to check out the work that you do, where's the best place for them to go? Where can they connect with you?
Look, you best to keep away from me, mate. It's not gonna. You'll end up doing things you don't want to do.
We've just been an hour talking about how positive that is.
If you want to do things you don't want to do, head my way. Now, my corporate site is adventure-alchemy.com. So adventure-alchemy.com. I believe we're down for some service things at the moment, I think, but that'll be up and running again shortly. And that will really just lead you to everything else that you want to look at in terms of the presentations on there. There is some models and some ideas and some strategies and some methodology and stuff you can look at there too. It outlines pretty much all the projects and adventures that we've done. And we often now also make documentaries while we're doing some of those projects too. So, and that's a current series we're working on called In Their Shoes. Can't remember the name of that. InTheirShoes.tv. If you go to InTheirShoes.tv, there's a series we put together where I've been spending some time in people's shoes that come from pretty much poverty, and the jobs and the things they have to do to get by, which has been a fascinating series so far, because I think, you know, a lot of my work in the development space, at least in the corporate world, the research often is focused on leaders or people in the military or those kind of things. You know what I mean? It's really interesting to look at leadership in a completely different context for people that don't have anything, right? Because I think leaders are everywhere. It's nice to go and, you know, look at those. There's a lot we can learn from people at the bottom of the food chain. I hate to use that term, but probably more, I think more so, because they have challenges that are real challenges. Like, you're not, in some of those cases, they're never going to get out of poverty. But I find it interesting how they still have faith that they not not that they will get out of it, because I know they're not going to get out of it. There's still something that keeps them going and pushing through and dealing with the arduous nature of their being, really. Just getting up in the mornings, just horrific in some of those places. Yes, if you find that interesting, head on over there.
Yeah, I'll definitely go and check that out. Richard, last question for you, mate. Do you have a challenge to leave us with today?
Whoa, challenges. Yeah, it's physical, mental, both.
Anything.
Challenge. It's not the meaningful, right? I think I think a good challenge is to sit down with somebody you trust, and that could be a work colleague or a loved one or a parent, and have a real honest and candid conversation around the things that you find scary in your life. I think that being very vulnerable and being honest with somebody around that stuff really is quite liberating, but extremely challenging. Very challenging to be honest. And I know you could do it yourself, but I think it's harder to go and voice that to somebody, particularly someone who you're loving, or someone who cares about you. One, you do that because it's safe, but the other thing is that it's hard. It's hard to go up to your partner or your mom or your brother or whatever and just say, do you know what I really struggle with is X, Y, and Z. You'll get some amazing feedback when you do that too.
Yeah, that's a great challenge. Richard, thank you so much for getting uncomfortable with me today.
I'm sure to take that, mate. I'm glad we're not in the same room.